This section is all about how you protect access into your network and devices. Section 4, Office Firewalls and Internet Gateways. I've broken this section down into two parts. In this first part, we look at how we manage the access details for our firewall, and I'll finish this part off by going through what I tend to advise my clients do to show good compliance in this section. Then in the second part, we'll look at how we configure the firewall, what we let through, and how we manage it. The other thing you need to remember is if you've got multiple locations, then you'll likely need to answer the following questions for each location. It's quite common for me to see someone describe their network in section 2 as having 3 locations and then only talk about one firewall here. Clearly, some things don't add up, and it usually results in them failing or having to resubmit. Question 1. Have you got a firewall at the boundary to your network? The first thing we need to know is, do you actually have a physical firewall in place? It's rare that you don't, but you should know and check that you do. If you're not sure on this, check where the internet comes into your building. Normally you'll have something like a BT Business Hub, a Draytec, a Zyxel, something like that. Check what it is, check that it has the firewall enabled on it. You must have a firewall between your internet connection and your office network. In the notes box, please list what firewall you have. If you've got multiple locations, list the location next to each firewall. Question 2, have you changed the default password on the firewall? The second thing we need to know is that you've changed whatever the default password was on your firewall. I'd say it's about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 businesses that I go into still have the default password set. It's great for us as a new IT provider, not having to wait for you to dig around searching for the password, but it's very, very bad from a cybersecurity perspective. The other thing to note is even if you've got something like a BT Business Hub, which comes with a unique password, it's still the default password and it must be updated. Question 3, is the password at least 8 characters and difficult to guess? When you're setting that firewall password, you need to make sure it's a strong password. It must be at least 8 characters in length and it must be difficult to guess. There are no requirements to have a certain number of uppercase, lowercase numbers and symbols, just that it's difficult to guess. This leaves you free to use the password technique that suits you best. Whether it's a random password set by a password manager, uses the NCSC 3-word password technique, or something else. Just don't make it something that's familiar to you or easy to work out. Question 4. Do you change the password when it's been compromised? The final note on passwords is how you handle them when you suspect they've been compromised. For me, I find this a really ambiguous question. What I find is most people's natural answer is, well, we've never been compromised, so we don't really have an answer for that. What I'm looking for here as an assessor is the understanding you've got of how you may be compromised and what you do about it in that scenario. What processes have you got in place in your organisation to find out about any weaknesses that may have been discovered? Who's got access to the firewall password? What if their machine is compromised? What if they get a virus or something similar? Do you monitor access to the firewall? Do you look at the logs of who's logged in and when, and flag up anything that's suspicious? Who gets notified of something that is suspicious? How do they determine whether to change the firewall password or not? What I'm looking for here is your organisation's awareness of potential security compromises, the impact they could have, and your understanding of how you should react. So that's the end of the first part about firewalls. It feels like we've been through that in quite some depth for what's a relatively simple set of questions. That's okay. I want to make sure you understand the questions properly, get a feel for how you should be answering them, and the things you should be doing to protect your organisation. In the next part, we're going to look at what you let through your firewall and how you manage it. But first, let's go through the common things I tend to advise my consultancy clients when we're holding their hand through Cyber Essentials. So a great way to show compliance for pretty much the whole of this firewall section is to create a firewall policy document. Now you should note that Cyber Essentials does not require that you create a policy. It simply requires that you meet certain technical controls. However, in my experience, the process of creating this policy and keeping it up to date is the best way to meet these controls. So we create a Word document. On the first page, we list the make and model of each firewall in the organisation. where it's located and what firmware version it's running. What we normally find at this stage is it's a couple of firmware versions out of date. So it's a great opportunity to update that right now, and it's a great little win for improving our security. Next to each firewall entry, we also note the date the password was last changed. And normally as part of this process, we also change the password right now just for good measure. We also add a section here to say what the password policy is, i.e. 15 plus characters containing at least 3 of the 4 character sets, or we always set the password through the random password generator. Next, we have a few pages that list the services allowed through the firewall. We'll cover that off in part 2. Next, we have a change control table. This lists any changes we've made to the firewall since this document was last created, followed by the date of the last firewall review and who signed it off. You can ask your IT people to create the policy for you. They can gather all the info for you and document it. You then just need to review it and sign it off. Now you've got a nice handy document to help you answer the first few questions that we've covered. That's the end of part 1. Join me for part 2, where we start to get into some of the slightly tougher questions. See you then.